I've edited over 100 books in my career as a freelance copy editor, and one reoccurring thing I see with new authors is improper dialogue format. So today we're going to go over the steps you need to know on how to format your dialect so that it's clear, engaging, and professional for your readers. What's going on, YouTube? My name is Andrea, the word engineer, a former engineer turned freelance book editor living in Mexico. I help aspiring authors and solopreneurs write, edit, and market their books to build their personal brand with authority. So let's get right into it. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go over the steps you need to know to format your dialogue. All right, so I got my screen pulled up and we're going to look over the steps you need to know on how to format your dialogue in a novel, okay? So the first thing we wanted to distinguish is the difference between a dialogue tag and an action beat. So dialogue tags are essentially she said, he said, she asked, she whispered, he shouted. They're very simple, yes? And then we have an action beat. An action beat is essentially the action of that specific character that's either taking place before the dialogue, somewhere in the middle of the dialogue, or perhaps after the dialogue, okay? So we have these two examples here. In the first one, we have, how's your run, Bill? She asked. So here we have it's color coded in green. We have our dialogue tag. And then in response, Bill wipes the sweat from his forehead. It was rough. It was rough, but I got it done. So here we see the action of Bill. It's not a dialogue tag, it's an action, okay? But we know this is Bill talking because the dialogue tag goes along with his character, okay? In the next example, we just have the same thing that Bill said. It was rough, but I got it done, Bill says. So in this case, we're not using a dialogue tag. We are using we're not using the action beat. We're using a dialogue tag, okay? So now let's look at an example of if both are used, okay? So let's get rid of that. So in this example, we just combined Bill's action beat, his dialogue, as well as the dialogue tag. In this case, it would be considered redundant if you use both the action beat as well as the dialogue tag, because we already know that Bill is the character who's speaking here based off the action beat. So in this case, I would not recommend using both a dialogue tag and an action beat. It would be considered redundant, okay? So one or the other is sufficient. Okay, let's look at point number 2. Where does the punctuation go? Do you know where the punctuation goes in dialogue? Let's take a look. Punctuation goes inside the quotation marks, okay? So here we have our examples. We have, how is your run, Bill? She asked. Our punctuation here is a question mark, okay? This is one sentence. And we also have a period. Let's make this yellow. So this is one full sentence right here, okay? Even though we have 2 punctuation marks, we have the question mark, then the dialogue, as well as the period, ending the complete full sentence with she asked, okay? In the next example, we have a comma. So commas usually go with dialogue tags unless it's a question mark or exclamation mark. So usually after a dialogue tag, we have a comma, and this is one full sentence. So we also have a period at the end of Bill says. And then in this third example, where we have the action beat, we have Bill wipes the sweat from his forehead. This ends in a period, okay? This ends in a period. And then we have Bill's dialogue. It was rough, but I got it done. These are 2 sentences, okay? Notice the difference between when we use a dialogue tag, it's 1 sentence, but when we use an action beat, it should be 2 sentences, okay? Now let's take a look at this last one. So in this last one, I had it X'd out because here we have a comma. So you don't want to use a comma when you have an action beat. You want to use a period in dialogue. So this would be considered improper formatting. And this is something I would fix if I was editing your book. Okay, now let's look at point number 3. Point number 3 says, every time a new character talks, a new line is started. I won't tell you how many times I've come across manuscripts where the dialogue is all in one paragraph and it's so confusing. It's confusing for you. I'm sure it's confusing for readers. And it's confusing for me as the editor, which is why it's super imperative to make sure that your dialogue is formatted properly. At least the bare minimum is having each character having a new line when they talk. That is essential, okay? Because when it's not, it's confusing. Who's saying what? You know, that's usually what I encounter when I see manuscripts where the dialogue with multiple characters is all in one paragraph. So let's take a look at the examples here. We have, how was your run, Bill? She asked. He wiped his forehead. It was rough, but I got it done. That's great, Bill. Yes. Okay. So here at the end, we don't have a dialogue tag and we don't have an action beat. Why? It's not needed. There's only two characters speaking. We already know who's talking. And since we know that each time a new character speaks, it's not necessary for this character to have, she says, if I can write. Okay, that's not necessary because we already know it's the character, whoever she is. Okay, so it's not necessary to include that, so we'll get rid of it. And then we have yes at the end. We know it's Bill because what other character could it be, right? So it's not necessary to include a dialogue tag or an action beat on every single line. Okay, it just depends on what you want to do as the author. If you want to make it more engaging, or maybe just one line or one line in a dialogue is all you need, you know? So let's look at point number 4. Dialogue should be indented except at the start of a new chapter and the start of a scene break. So in typical book formatting, I would say, or the standard, I would say, typically at the start of a chapter or at the start of a scene break, the very first line is not indented, and then the rest of the paragraphs and the lines are indented. That's typically how the structure goes. Now, I have worked with some authors who do not like indentations at all whatsoever. And I do recall a time where I added indentations, and the author was like, yeah. And I worked with him again, and he was like, yeah, next time don't do that. So yeah, so definitely, if you don't want your dialogue to be formatted that way with indentations, let your editor know so they don't make that mistake like I did, okay? So yeah, so dialogue typically is usually indented, but with the exceptions, okay? Let's look at point number 5, when to use single quotation marks, okay? So sometimes you may have a character who repeats what another character says. So in this example, we have our regular quotation marks. When I asked Bill how his run was, he said, it was rough, but I got it done. I told him that was great. So within this dialogue, right, we have Bill's message that we looked at in previous examples, okay? Here, you will notice that we have single quotation marks within the double quotation marks, okay? So when a character is repeating what someone else is saying, this is when we would use single quote marks, okay? Let's look at the last point, point number 6. Yes, if a character has a long monologue, for example, you don't use closing quotation marks at the end of the paragraph, however, or but an opening quotation mark is needed at the start of the new paragraph, okay? So let's take a look at this example. I'm going to read it for you guys because I think it's fun. Okay, so we have, of course, we have dialogue. It should start with a quotation mark. This is an example of a really long monologue of a character. Do you remember the difference between a dialogue tag and an action beat? Are you sure? Drop that definition of what they are and how they differ in dialogue in the comment section. So in this part, you notice we don't have a closing quotation mark, only an opening, okay? So let's go into the next paragraph where we have an opening quotation mark. Wow, this character is still talking. Do you remember where the punctuation goes when formatting dialogue? Add that to your comment below, just to make sure you remember when you're writing the dialogue in your story. Okay, so here again, we do not have a closing quotation mark. But in the next paragraph, the start of this paragraph, we do have an opening quotation mark. Sheesh, this monologue is so long. But one last thing, what do you remember about indentations in dialogue? And oh yeah, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, so now that the monologue is finished, we finally have a closing quotation mark for this character. Okay, so this is how you would format dialogue if you have a character whose speech is really long and you need multiple paragraphs. This is how you would format it. Okay, now we're going to look at a few examples of dialogue that I have encountered in my career that has been formatted improperly. Okay, so the first example, okay, so I sourced this content from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. I sourced it from Project Gutenberg. If you've never heard of this website, they have tons of free books and audiobooks and Kindle books that you can send to your Kindle as well. And they're all free. They're all books that have been written years ago, so they're all copyright free. So check it out if you've never heard of it. I think it's a really great book. It's a really great website. Okay, so I've actually come across dialogue where the author has put the names of the characters. Here we have three different characters. We have the Queen, we have Alice, and we have the White Rabbit who's talking. And this is how they formatted it. And this doesn't give any life to your story. Like, we don't have any action beats, we don't have any dialogue tags, and it really just feels very flat and dry. So before you get to at least the copy editing stage, you want to make sure that your dialogue is in proper quotation marks. You do have your dialogue tags and action beats to make sure it's written the way you want and it's giving the desired effect that you want your readers to feel. Okay, so this is a no. To have your character's name with the colon and then whatever that character's saying. Okay, let's take a look at another example. And I mentioned this before. Another example that is a no is when you have all of your characters in one paragraph. This is a huge no. It's really confusing, not only for me as the editor, it will be for your readers. They might confuse which character is which because it's like this. So you want to make sure that this is done before you reach at least before you reach the copy editing stage, and likely before you reach the line editing stage, because it's really confusing when it's all jumbled together in one paragraph. Okay. So now we're going to look at the example of what it would look like when it's done properly. Okay. So here we have our three characters. Each character has a new line. We have the Queen, we have Alice, we have the Queen, then we have the rabbit, Alice, the rabbit, and so forth. And each character has a new line. We have our dialogue tags, we have our action beats. It's giving life to the story, and it's just more engaging, okay? And now I want to highlight two specific little nuances that you can add to your dialogue to give it make it a bit more dynamic. So the first one is the ellipses, right? These are the little three dots. I think I saw an Instagram post maybe last week where someone couldn't remember the word for ellipses and they called it drama dots, and I really like that. It was funny. So these drama dots or ellipses are often used when a author wants to show that a character is stuttering or they're trailing off in their conversation. Okay. And the next nuance thing we want to look at is the em dash. So the em dash is this really long dash, and it's mostly used when a character has been interrupted by another character. So here we have the rabbit talking, and then the queen cuts in, "Get to your places," shout at the queen, and just interrupts what the rabbit is saying. So in this case, we want to use an em dash, not an ellipses, when a character is being interrupted. Okay. So those are the steps you need to know on how to format your dialogue in your novel. I hope it's been helpful for you all. Hope it cleared up any doubts or any misconceptions you may have had as far as how to format your dialogue. Make sure you like, make sure you comment, make sure you subscribe, and be sure to check out my last video. I'm gonna upload it over here, probably over here, I think. Make sure you check that out where I break down what you need to know in the book editing process, as well as giving you a live price breakdown of what you can expect as far as pricing goes in the book editing process. Okay? Y'all have a good one.